Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell. And today we've got a special guest in here. I've got Ty Higgins from the Ohio Farm Bureau. I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about himself here in just a minute, but we're going to take a unique angle. So stay tuned as we get into the content here today. But Ty, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, Mark.
Awesome. Ty, opening question. Everybody gets it. What does it mean for you to be intentional?
For me, it's setting goals, right? And every morning I wake up, I set a goal or goals for that day. I have goals for the week, I have goals for the month, I have goals for the year, I have goals for my career. And that's to me what intentional is. It's putting on paper. I literally write down on paper what my goals are. And I check those boxes as I go throughout the day and throughout the week and month, year, and so on. And I don't always get to all the goals, but I think putting them down makes it more intentional that you know what you have to accomplish in order to succeed. And I try to win the day. And I think if you win the day, it goes a long way in what's to come long term.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. To me, people that are really intentional, they just seem to squeeze more of the juice out of life, than some of us. And the really intentional ones inspire me. And one of those consistent characteristics that you find with those people is that they know what they want. They know what they're
Yeah.
after. They know what they're about. So good stuff, man. Well, tell us a little bit about your role at Ohio Farm Bureau, your work. I know you come from a farm broadcasting background, so I'm going to be watching my interview style here, all because I know you've got more experience than I do in that arena. But let's share with us a little bit about what you do at Ohio Farm Bureau.
Well, first of all, I don't judge.
Yeah.
I was born on a dairy farm in central Ohio, and it was in the mid 80s. We had a farm crisis where interest rates were above 20% and land values were junk, and we had to sell off the family farm. And I was 8 years old when that happened. And I don't know what it is, Mark, but throughout my teenage years and early 20s, I just had this fire in my gut to be a part of agriculture in one way, shape, or form. And so, right out of high school, I became a farm broadcaster. 17 years old, I was a farm broadcaster. And so I was able to work with farmers and visit with farmers and go to farms and actually be involved in the industry in that way. And that evolved into a country music career in Columbus for 15 years. I was a DJ of the morning show in Columbus, and then got back into farm broadcasting
Hmm.
for about 10, 11 years. And now I'm with Farm Bureau. And what I do there is, I don't know if you call it the dark side or the light side, but I went from a broadcaster to working with the media. So my main objective at Farm Bureau is media relations. I'm the senior director of communications, so media relations falls under that. Social media falls under that. I represent Farm Bureau for all of our water quality efforts we're doing as an industry, but also farmer mental health is one of the pillars that I hold up through Ohio Farm Bureau and through Ohio Agriculture. So, love what I do, and I try every day to do something where another 8 year old that's on the farm bottle feeding calves in his size one boots doesn't have to worry if he's not going to be able to do it the next day. That's who I think about when I work on policy and work on communications and marketing and strategies is to try to strengthen whatever farm family we're working with throughout the state in order to help them succeed to the next generation.
What a great mission. What a great mission. Great answer. And I can completely relate to that time in the 80s. Came up in my first 10 years was in the 80s, and or at least most of it. And I didn't grow up on a traditional farm. My dad was a fur trader and trapper, but it's a very obscure part of this rural lifestyle that not too many people lived out, but we did. And his passion, his whole life had been trapping, and he built a whole business on it. And we had 500 fox on our farm, and we raised it like a cow calf herd, right? And that was basically except they were in pens, and you fed them different things. And this was my first job, was working, collecting, things from that would run off from underneath the fox pens. That was a byproduct of that industry, to feeding, to driving the little lawn tractors so we could take food and different things down to the fox. But in the mid to late 80s, the two big things happened. One, the Russians stopped buying fur, And two, there was a lot of animal activism that really killed the demand for domestic fur. So, as my dad would put it, we came within 2 days of having that eviction notice tacked on the front door
Mm.
after we lost, he lost the business and all the assets and everything. And so we went through that very tough time, and that's still a very visceral part of my childhood. I remember, going through that time frame. It's been a big part of the story, but I'm I'm acutely in tune with with the my friends in the agriculture industry who maybe went through something similar, and those who continue to fight for their way of life. So appreciate
To
what you're
see
doing, man.
to see our parents go through that adversity
Mm-hmm.
is one thing, but to learn how to work like you and I did at a young age, I think that has come a long way for me.
Yeah.
To understand the value of a hard day's work, to know what it's like to be so tired at the end of the day that you're asleep as soon as your head hits the pillow.
Mm-hmm.
Those those aren't inherent to everybody. That's something that you learn by watching. And I had two sets of grandparents and my parents that I just learned by watching, right? And they didn't have to say a word. But I use all those things today that
Mm.
I didn't even know that I needed. But here
Yeah.
we are.
Yep. Absolutely. And it definitely shines through and shows through. When you see people who grew up in this way of life, you know that you got someone who knows how to put in a day.
For sure.
Yeah. Uh, as running an employee training coaching company, employee training and coaching company, obviously we get to deal with a lot of different types of people from a lot of different backgrounds, and sometimes you find people who, man, you like we have to coach hard work.
Yeah.
Right.
When I was a farm broadcaster, we would hire interns, and if they came from a dairy farm, I knew they were going to be there at 4 in the morning when we
Yep.
started broadcasting. And if that was on the resume, you're hired.
Yep. 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 Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, Ty, I think you have a really interesting background to be able to share a little bit about, not only where you came from, but also, what you see going on in the industry, the need to be able to communicate. So, since this is this is the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast, and we've got business leaders from all across the ag industry listening to this as they drive down the road or walk on the treadmill or wherever they're at right now. Generally speaking, what would you advise them to be thinking about as it pertains to, from even from their business roles? Maybe they're a team leader, a vice president, a CEO, to be able to advise their teams on the use of social media and communications platforms that we have to be able to tell our story in ag today.
Well, I mean, they're not going anywhere, is the first thing I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants to think that things are fads, right? And sure, there are some social media platforms that have come and gone. But I think that when you look at what's out there today and who's consuming that social media, you need to be there. If you're not there, you're missing out on a huge opportunity to talk about what you do, how you do it, why you do it, to 98% of the population that has those questions, and they're looking for answers. And if they don't get them from you, they're going to get them from somewhere else. And so that's why Ohio Farm Bureau in particular, and what I do, we use social media for that very purpose. We do, sure, a lot of communicating with our members and with people inside the industry, but anytime that I work with the media, who do you think when I'm talking to that reporter, who do you think I'm talking to? Or when I post something on Facebook or X or Instagram, who am I? I'm talking to consumers, whether you realize that or not. And I think that's why uh, we put so much emphasis on social media, and we're always looking for what is next. There is going to be a new platform. There are some trying right now to take over for what X has not become over the past several months or a year. There are some that see what TikTok's doing and they're trying to replicate that. So, what's next? And again, if you're not there, you're conspicuous by your absence. And that's what I try to emphasize with people in the industry is that this is a tool that we need to utilize, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I were talking off the mic. One of the things that I try to coach specifically our sales coaching clients through is the need to establish a personal brand. right? A brand for what you believe in, for where you come from. And maybe you work in agronomy, maybe you work in dairy, maybe you work in the pork industry, whatever, wherever, whichever niche, whatever area you're in. I believe that there's a need to establish one's self, whether it be through LinkedIn, Snapchat, uh, TikTok, grow your own email list, but something that's yours, right? That you can establish, because I do believe in the professional world, over time, almost the personal brand becomes more important than the business brand. I know that's going to make a lot of business leaders a little bit uneasy because how do you control that? But I also think it's a huge advantage because there's so many ways to be able to tell their business story, and even the company benefiting from the knowledge that that person brings. It already happens at the farm gate when you have somebody who's maybe a good salesperson, right? And if that salesperson leaves and goes to another company or gets recruited to another company, you immediately, that new company is benefiting from that person's relationships. But I think what's kind of cool from a branding perspective is there's so many ways for you to establish yourself as an expert, right? And then have your farmer customer potentially find you, right? Or at least give you some content that you can send them. There's a lot. And before I go on too terribly, too much terrible farther, I would love for you to share a couple ways that you've been able to establish, the either Ohio Farm Bureau brand or the Ty Higgins brand through, some of the posting and different creative things that you've done. I know there's a few kind of really cool ones out there.
Yeah, and I'll say first that I fully believe that, when I was hired to work for Ohio Farm Bureau from my farm broadcasting career, that was a major career leap for me. That was a huge step forward in my career. But I really truly believe that if it weren't for my social media presence, that I might not have got a second look when I sent my resume in.
Sure.
And I think your social media presence is now, whether you want it to be or not, part of your resume.
Yeah.
What you're doing on social media. I tell my kids this all the time. Careful what you post, because when you apply for a job, they're going to find you and they're going to see exactly what you're up to when you're not on the clock, which is an important part of the hiring process.
Yeah.
So I was able to um, show my personality, build my brand, talk about agriculture in a way that enticed Ohio Farm Bureau to think, well, if he can do that for him and that radio network he's on now, boy, that we need that. We need someone to tell agriculture story. Um, but when I got hired onto Farm Bureau, I did some of that. I have done an okay job of building the brand. We have gained tens of thousands of people on all the platforms based on what we're doing, me and my team on social media. Um, but uh, I think that if you put yourself out there, we'll maybe talk about vulnerability a little bit later
Mm-hmm.
on in the conversation. But um, I, I kind of taken that responsibility off of myself and put it on our members as farmers. Nobody can tell your story like you can, no matter what part of agriculture you're in. You do things a certain way,
Right.
and other people are curious, consumers or people in the industry, about how you do what you do, and if it's better than what they do, they can learn from you. You can learn from them, and so I tell my members all the time to tell their story. No
Mm-hmm.
one tells it like they do, and it's interesting. Um, because you and I live our lives and we're so far immersed in what we do every day. We may not think that what we do is interesting, but it is. There are people out there that are curious about how you and I go about our day-to-day operations and our lives and our careers. So I think it's important for people, no matter what part of the industry you're in, to think about telling your story and getting involved in social media, building your brand. As you mentioned, you can take your brand wherever you go. I took it with me from farm broadcasting to senior
Yeah.
director of communications. And I think it was
That's
a
a
huge,
really good point.
huge
Yeah.
help for me to build my career.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point, right? When you think about establishing that personal brand as a means to then leverage that to be able to go and work with the companies that you want to be able to go and work with at some point. Most of us who are in the professional side, on the business side of the industry, you had there's somewhere that you wanted to go work, maybe a dream company, a dream job, something you saw yourself doing, at some point. So, and I
Yeah.
also chuckle. I think about, just this idea that people are Well, we think it's like our job. Our job isn't that unique or special, right? But I'll share this. This is a little bit extreme, but kind of, and also a little bit funny, but it's relatable. So I grew up after the fur industry went under. It took several years, but we transitioned into fishing bait, and so it was more of an aquaculture upbringing in my teenage years, right? So back in 2009, I was still involved with the family operation, even though I had long since moved on to start my career. But on the kind of as a side hustle, we rejoined forces and we started selling fishing bait, specifically leeches, which is what I spent most of my time doing as a kid, was trapping leeches. And so I had made a video called "How to Trap Leeches," and today it is the number one video for reigning now for 14 years on YouTube for how to trap leeches. I'm still getting requests, like either through YouTube or through a Facebook. People come and find me, are like, "Hey, do you guys got any leeches for sale?" The old man passed away 9 years ago. We've been out of the business for a long time. But it still lives on. So, you put these pieces of content out there and you become known as the bait guy, the leech wrangler, whatever. And it's sort of stuck. And for me, it's become a conversation point. It's actually a part of my keynote, a story that I tell, within it. But man, I mean, people are interested in stuff that you would find mundane.
Absolutely. And I don't think I was supposed to advocate for agriculture as a farm broadcaster. I think I might have crossed a line there, but it was passionate for me
Mm-hmm.
to share the story of the people we were covering and to share it in a positive way.
Yeah.
And I think Farm Bureau noticed that and noticed something
Yeah.
in that messaging and in that brand that they would find useful. And so far, this career has fit like a glove from what I was doing on social media. So.
Love it. A lot of times we ask companies what they're doing to attract and retain talent. Would love for you, Ty, to kind of talk a little bit. We talked about the personal brand. How can companies position themselves through social media to attract really good people?
Yeah, I mean it's being relatable. You know, culture is a huge part of our society and a huge part of our work environment now. And I think that our values are bleeding into our work more now than they ever have. And I think companies, if they don't understand or recognize that, they're not going to be able to retain their people. Um, and this goes particularly to our younger workforce. Um, the way they think about their jobs is different than the way you and I thought about our jobs in our early 20s, right? We went in, we clocked in, we got our job done, we went home, and we knew that if we continued to work hard, that eventually we would see a reward. Um, but younger people, I mentioned they know their values, but boy, they know their worth, and they're passionate about doing something different and impacting our society as soon as they graduate college. That's something that our generation just didn't think about. How am I going to change the world at 22 years old? I was still worried about making a car payment. So it's a completely different mindset. And if companies don't understand that philosophy of younger people wanting to make a difference for one, wanting to make an impact, but also knowing what they're worth and knowing what their values are and being true, staunchly true to those values, the corporate world will be turned on its side. And I think it has, especially since COVID. I think that has
Yeah.
bled into because I have younger people on my team that I'm learning from. You know, boy, that's a really cool way of going about thinking about your career and your job and your life. And I've tried to mimic what they do. It's a little harder at 46 to change
Yeah.
those types of things, but I think there's something to be said for the way they go about their business and how we can learn, find better balance, get out of the corporate rut of always thinking it has to be a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And Ohio Farm Bureau has done a really good job with that.
Yeah.
We thought about that, and it's more than just being able to wear jeans to work. It's working from home. If you don't have that option, I think you're going to miss out on a lot of really talented people. They give us Christmas break. They give us a week off for Christmas every year,
Yeah.
not PTO. They just give us a free week.
Here's the week.
Those types of things, and then just fully understanding what the goals of everyone in that organization is, and that's something that Farm Bureau, especially over the last 5 years, have been very cognizant of, and
Hmm.
we've been able to retain some really talented people that otherwise, if we'd taken other directions, wouldn't have been able to hang on to those people.
That's good to hear. It takes a lot of time and intention to
Boy,
sit down and create those policies, maybe be a little bit bold, break the mold a little bit, do something a little bit differently, and really open up to, yeah, to new ways, instead of saying, you know, which the old guard that you and I grew up in was, you had to conform
yeah,
to
absolutely.
whatever was. Now it seems like the pendulum's kind of swinging the other way a little bit.
Well, and we work through a board. We work at the mercy of the board.
Mm-hmm.
And but they were as open-minded as our executive vice president was about this. They saw exactly what he was saying, and they went along with it. And I don't know if every organization has that dynamic of a board, but we did, and like I said, it's really helped us move forward. We now have a culture committee that is a member from each of our departments of Ohio Farm Bureau that work together to make sure
Wow.
that everybody's on the same page and that we're all moving in the right direction. And it's worked out very, very well so far.
Yeah. I think one of the things, I don't think, I know one of the things that I find is really imperative, because we get involved in a lot of culture projects. So what it boils down to is, at the end of the day, you have to, you know, as a leadership team, as an intentional leader, you have to decide, what is the culture going to be? And this is, you know, and the market will help you determine what your success is going to be. That's a, you know, we're still in a capitalistic free economy here for the most part. And so it'll show you, right, whether or not your decision was accurate and as impactful as you hoped it would be. But I respect anybody, and I've said this a lot on the show, I respect anybody who's willing to stand up and say, this is the culture we're going to have. Right.
Yeah.
I know one CEO in the industry who just says, we're an office culture. But you know what he did? He created a really kick-ass office. I will sometimes, I don't even, they're not even a client. I will sometimes go and work there just
Just to play
because
ping pong
it's
and
such an amazing work
arcade
environment.
games, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you can get people that don't even work for you to want to come and work in your office, then you're doing something well, right? But so if that's what you're going to do, then you have to do that part really well. If you're going to figure out how to do the work from home thing, work across. I have a Ani who you communicated with, who's my assistant. She has worked for my wife and I now for 4 years. My wife has seen her one time in person because she was in Southern California where Ani lives. I have never met her in person. Now there's a couple, there's a COVID thing in there that's part of it, and then there was a health issue where she couldn't travel, and I haven't been out to that part of the country since we. She continues to progress. She continues to get better. Where we invest time in training her and feedback and coaching, and she, I mean, now we can't even think about, like, you know, she's somebody we wouldn't want to not have on the team, right? We've done that virtually, so I know that can happen. My team has always been virtually, and or been run virtually. So I think it really, at the end of the day, you have to pick a team, pick a, you know, pick what your culture is going to be. Are you an office culture, or you virtual culture, or a hybrid, you know, and then all the other things that go in with your culture, depending on the type of business. So a lot of our listeners are probably going to be ag retailers, where guess what, the work from home isn't always going to be there, right? May vary a little bit different times of year. You have different types of flexibility, but I'll digress a little bit. I want to talk about, just real quick, what's the head count? How many folks work for Ohio Farm Bureau?
About 94 of us total.
94. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a
Yep.
much bigger organization than I thought. Very cool. um, from a, so in addition to the culture stuff, what else seems to be helpful in that type of organization for retaining those great people?
So again, I always like to compare to what I came up through, right? And we were given a title and a job description, and I'm sure you had the same
Yep.
thing. And that you mentioned conforming, and that was it. That was your job title, and that was your job duty. Boy, that boxed you in pretty quickly. Didn't give you a chance to expand. But for my team, and I think many other team leaders at Ohio Farm Bureau do this, is that I don't see that job title and description as a box. I see it as a starting point. And, we've always joked throughout our career that we have other duties as assigned, right? But I think that the way I see it is other talents as discovered. And I think that I have seen teammates grow exponentially in their position because I didn't box them in, because I let them find out what their other passions were and what their other talents were. We have someone we brought in for social media, and now she's doing a little graphic design and content creation with video work. We didn't bring her in for that, but she understood that she enjoyed it, and it came a little easier to her than she thought. And now she's grown. Another one we brought in for administrative work, and now she's creating content for our young ag professionals and just doing an awesome job because she's younger herself of relating what Ohio Farm Bureau is trying to do for that demographic. So we don't box people in. We let them grow. We let them figure out what their strengths are, their weaknesses are, and we build upon both. And that has been really important to retention for my team in particular. But I think that the job title and descriptions are not simply a box, but it's just that starting line, and where you go from there is completely up to you and your potential.
There's a good deal of intention within that because you have to really be open minded and be paying attention to what's, where these people are maybe naturally gravitating to. Can you talk about the how behind that? So how do you see that? How do you disengage from maybe I expected this person to be really great at this, but they're really maybe a little bit better at that. I mean, that can be. I could see someone listening to this, saying like, "That sounds like a hot mess. I'm not going. I'm not going down that path." But can you talk about the how to a little bit?
Sometimes it's born out of necessity, right? I
Sure.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have the budget maybe to hire someone, and so you look around the room and you're like, well, have you ever thought about doing this? Or the one I told you about that came in for social media and now is doing more video work. I happened to come along on YouTube, a video she did for the Ohio State University Extension Office. And it was for an immersive dome experience they had at the state fair where you walked into the dome and it was a 360-degree video of agriculture. You were flying in a drone, you were in a pasture, you were in a milking parlor. And I'm like, you did this? And she's like, yeah, I did this. I'm like, wow, what else can you do? Right.
Right.
And she lit up and I lit up and we started talking about the possibilities. And so that's how that started. Um, and then the other one that was here for administrative, I think she was just kind of waiting for her time to shine, right? And then all of a sudden we needed someone to create content and be able to relay what our young ag professionals need to hear from an Ohio Farm Bureau standpoint.
Yeah.
She fit the mold. And she had an internship in the middle part of the country in Kansas City where she did some writing, and she wanted to get back to that a little bit. So I don't think you're pulling things out of thin air for people. It's something
Yeah.
that they have in their arsenal, and they just haven't had a chance to really show it off, and to be able to give them the opportunity to do that, um, I think helps us, of course, as an organization, but also helps them to understand that you see their value in more than just what you brought them in for. And I think that's important.
Yeah, that is important. Do you guys have any sort of cadence to your social media production as far as, hey, we need to be touching these platforms X number of times a day, a month, per week, or anything like that?
Yeah. We try, but we try to also, as intentional as you try to be in your career,
Yeah.
I think we try to be more organic in social media. We don't want to just put something out there for the sake of posting something. So we do probably two and every once in a while three posts on Facebook. X is a different animal. We can probably post on there as many times as we want, and it wouldn't harm us. Um, Instagram is probably once a day, maybe twice if the content is relevant. And then TikTok is we do a little more creative work and thought on TikTok. We really want it to and Reels. We use the same videos for TikTok and Reels. We want them to be more impactful. We want them to have more life and longer and longevity too. So, um, I don't have a spreadsheet where it says we have to do this here and this here and this here. It's very organic, but we don't want to overdo it either, right? I mean, you can do too much social media, and all of a sudden the algorithm sees that and it starts to drown you out a little bit. So we try to keep up with the algorithms, which are changing every day. But it's all about content with us. We don't post something just for the sake of posting something. Sometimes it is for messaging. Sometimes it is for marketing, and sometimes it's for the consumers directly. right? Our members need to see that. Even though a lot of our members are on Facebook, they need to see that we're directly connecting with consumers and sharing the message of agriculture. That's what some of the membership dollars go towards as well, is education. And so that's a one of the big parts of online. Like I said, 98% of social media users don't know anything about what we do in agriculture. So we have a captive audience there, and an audience that is wanting to know more and more about where their food comes from, and the production process of it. So
But there's like we've said, there's so many great opportunities for people to engage there, whether it's positioning personal brand, positioning the business brand, telling the story of agriculture. Ty, I have 6 avocado plants at my house because I watched a TikTok about how to sprout an avocado seed, and we eat a bunch of avocados. And so, like my son and I got into it, and now he's had this whole experience. Well, now he knows how to grow an avocado. I mean, we live in the country, but we just live on a lot. We don't have a lot of growing space, but we've got avocados growing here in central North Carolina. So, as sort of silly as that sounds, man, like you can engage people, right? And
yeah,
and if I was a farmer, I guess I would want to know that my local co-op or my supplier of whatever level, how national or international, is doing something to advocate on my behalf, not just leaving it to the Farm Bureau, not just leaving it to the checkoff, folks of whatever commodity they happen to be representing, but really getting down to that level. And I think that would be cool. I think there's opportunity for folks in that arena. Can you? I want to before I want to. I'm going to spend some time in the back half of this, or the last 10 minutes here, Ty, talking a little bit more about you. But can you talk a little bit about the milk uh, promotion that you guys did? Because I heard you speak about this in Ohio here a couple weeks ago, and I thought that was fascinating stuff. So can you just share that story real quick?
yeah, it was a highlight for me, and it was part of. I didn't do this to build my brand, right? And I think that's a lot of the success stories that you have on social media are not intentional. They're those organic moments that you put on, and all of a sudden, wow. So this was back in 2018, 19. Milk was $1 a gallon at the grocery store, and that was disheartening to me. I know that at $1 a gallon, no one's making money on the dairy side, and so I had an idea um, to buy 10 gallons of milk, $10 worth of milk, and take it to the local food pantry. And so my daughter, who was in high school at the time, came along with me and documented it via video, and we put that video online and used the hashtag 10-gallon challenge. And um, what started as just me and 10 gallons of milk turned into a national movement of people going to the grocery store, buying 10 gallons of milk and taking it to the local food pantry. Fresh milk's the number one requested item at the food pantry. And
Interesting.
so when I saw that opportunity, I put it on social media. It began to grow. Um, Directors of agriculture from one state were challenging directors of agriculture from another state. Governors of states were challenging other governors of states. And
Uh,
people just kept posting pictures, thousands of pictures of them doing the 10-gallon challenge. And
wow.
one of my favorite pictures, there's a lot of great pictures. If you use the hashtag 10-gallon challenge, you can go back and take a look. But someone sent me a picture of empty milk shelves at a grocery store.
Yeah.
And that to me was one of the best pictures of the whole movement, because we were able to get that milk to people who needed it, and be able to move milk across the country. I'm not saying I made a huge difference. I did not, but um, getting people to understand that $1 for a gallon of milk is a steal, and that on the back end of that is a farmer really struggling and waking up in the morning to lose money by milking his cows, um, needed to be a story that had to be told, because people, they see $1 a gallon and they think, oh, what a great deal. Not for everyone. And I think I needed to connect the dots there, and I think I did, and it was just unbelievable to see everybody taking part, and it was truly a highlight for me.
Beautiful, man. Well, Thanks for doing it, and thanks for sharing the story. It was when I saw that, I was like, "That's so cool." Now I know the guy behind the 10-gallon challenge. So I spent a lot of time in dairy country in Minnesota. Most of those dairies are no longer there, unfortunately. But I did spend most of my last 2 years of my high school career milking cows, working on a large dairy up there. So a lot of dairy background. My sister worked for Land O'Lakes in a cheese plant until she retired here about 5 years ago. And so we got and my dad actually had when he was in his early 20s, built a 125 cow dairy in central Michigan, south central Michigan, just south of Lansing there. So we've got a storied history in the dairy space in our family. So appreciate what you're doing and what you've done.
Yeah.
That's been cool, man. I want to do a little bit of a speed round and kind of go through and just let people under the Ty Higgins hood a little bit here. So what's been the biggest challenge you've ever had to overcome in your career, Ty?
So it's, I struggle when I lose people, and not just people, but great people. And as a leader, you always want to wonder what you did wrong or what you could have done different
Mm-hmm.
to keep those people around. And I've come to the realization that sometimes it's really not you, it's them. You could give them, the culture they want and the benefits they want and the work they want, but there's if there's something out there that fits them better, that fits their passion better, um, you have to let them go, and you have to understand that's just part of the process. One of the best teammates I ever had, I thought he was going to be with me for years. Um, he was a Christian fellow, and he got an opportunity. He did video production for us, and a church offered him a position to do video production for them.
Mm,
He felt that was his calling. How can you argue with that?
right.
And it sucked to lose him. He was so talented. But I needed to understand that it wasn't Ohio Farm Bureau. It wasn't Ty Higgins that he was leaving. He
Mm-hmm.
was finding something better for himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's been the biggest challenge is you always want to blame yourself as a leader and think, what do I need to change? Because I just lost another one. That's part of the process. And if you're a good leader, you'll realize that sometimes your leadership is what made them realize that there was something better out there for them. And so that's the approach I've taken. But that's been a huge challenge. You work so hard to develop relationships with people, personally and professionally. But then after all that work of developing them in that role, to have them leave is devastating. But um, you have to understand that those things are going to happen, and you have to move forward and know that it's the best for them. So
Well, at the end of the day, man, I mean that it stinks. I can viscerally relate to that. As you're telling your story, I'm thinking about the hardest one I ever went through. With that same person, thought we were going to be together for a long time, build this business together, etc. Um, but at the end of the day, man, intentional leaders attract great talent. So if you're looking for a measurement about whether or not you've been a very intentional leader for the last 3, 4, 5 years, how's your talent pipeline? What's the number of people standing up, getting in line to come work for you? If that's not very deep, there's probably work to do.
yeah,
And that's just, I mean, some people may not like to hear that, but that's just honest feedback. And we've got clients in rural America where supposedly there's nobody to go do these jobs who are having to turn people away. Why? Because they've done the intentional work to build intentional cultures. They're taking care of their people. They're building a reputation in that rural marketplace, and they're attracting talent from other entities, even maybe non-ag entities, into their space, and it's working. So you can't tell me that it can't be done. And that's a great point. What's been your biggest win?
oh, my biggest win, adjusting to this younger generation,
Mm,
um, and understanding what makes them tick. Some people just can't get past um, what they know from being 22 years old straight out of college and having to earn it, right? And having to do those really awful jobs to earn your way, right? That's not the case anymore. These young people, as I mentioned earlier, they graduate and they truly believe, and in some cases they can be the CEO of a large organization. They want that job now. They don't think that it's 15, 20 years down the road. They want it now. I admire that. I wish I had that gumption as a
Mm,
22-year-old. I could have done a lot with it. Um, but to be able to uh, understand the mindset of younger people coming in, my team, they're in their late 20s, early 30s, which compared to me is young. But even those that are coming in, as I mentioned, in their mid 20s, that have that mentality, um, I admire that, and I think if they think they're capable of it, and they have an opportunity to go somewhere and do it, do it. But I think that companies need to understand, and leaders need to understand the different thought process of these people just working their way into the industry. I think it's a good thing.
mhm. Well, that's a huge win, and you probably are going to have people calling asking for advice on how to do that because they have not figured out what you figured out.
You have to just be, it's about being open minded, right? And I
Mhm.
think it does help too that I have two kids. I have a 19-year-old who's a sophomore in college, and I have a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school.
Yeah,
And you talk about building brands. My kids, whether they intentionally did it or not, have their brand on social media. And that's just the way that it was for them with technology and with social media, is that they already have their brand. They're teenage kids, and they intentionally or not have their own brand on social media.
yep,
And I think that that seeing that mindset and seeing what they're doing and how they think has helped me through my process.
yeah. Man, our 20-year-old, I mean, she doesn't pay for anything. She doesn't. I mean, I'm talking, she's got an Instagram account and she makes incredible reels and incredible photos, and she will get invited to go stay at these Airbnbs to promote the Airbnb and make a video, a story about it, and post that. She gets free swimsuits. I mean, like effectively, almost like we would call this in our day, we would call this a travel blogger. I don't know. Now they're
Yeah,
an Instagram influencer, right?
yeah, that's
But
right.
that's her thing. I know another girl. My oldest daughter is a type 1 diabetic, and so I follow people in the diabetic community. There's one girl who gets paid to just travel the world and take pictures, camping or swimming or having fun in different places, going to amusement parks, showing off her Dexcom,
Yep.
her continuous glucose monitor, on her arm, her Omnipod over here. My daughter's doing the same thing. And has the same equipment. I'm like, you need to start taking some pictures and getting some free trips so we can go go do some fun stuff, right? So anyway, great. What do you like in the way of books, podcasts, things? What's your learning these days?
Yeah, just read Brene Brown, Dare to
Mm,
Lead.
the lead. There you go.
Um, Crazy good book. And I don't typically tell people what to read, but if you do read this book, go to pages 92 and 93. Um, she separates armored leadership from daring leadership. And I tell you that because um, you really have to take a look at your style of leadership.
Mm.
And I hope as you read those two pages that you understand which one works and which one doesn't. And if you can have a colleague that's a little more, that could be more vulnerable, to ask them, how do you see my style of leadership? And if it's the one that doesn't feel right, it's time to start making some adjustments. Luckily, I asked my kids. They'll be honest as anybody. When you hear me doing calls like this, when you hear me talking to people on my team from my office, because I know they're nosy, they're right across the hall. How do you see my leadership? And they went down the list and they picked the one that I was hoping they would pick. If they picked the different one, I had a lot of work to do, and I still do. Don't get me wrong. But if you lead um, with intention of making everyone else better instead of making everyone else smaller, um, it's going to make you and your team a lot better in the long run.
So true, man. So true. But I try to live by this the best I can. I would say that as long as I keep putting more value in to the industry than I ask of it, I should never go hungry.
Exactly right.
Right? Can I out? And that's what I wake up thinking about. A leading indicator of success is someone in my opinion, who what they're putting into others is always outpacing what they're taking.
Yep.
You know, Good stuff. All right. What last two questions? We're gonna put them together. I'll let you kind of roll with it.
Okay.
Number one is like, what's the biggest thing you know you've got to improve on? And then number two, what is how important is vulnerability? You've got the Brene Brown book, so you got a good reference guide right there. But how important is that vulnerability in your intentional leadership?
Yeah. So, um, my dad and my grandpa both wore their emotions right there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in my DNA to uh, to be more reactionary than I want to be, and I fight this every single day of my career. Is that I don't want to be reactionary. I need to take a step back and a deep breath, and um, I'm better at it now than I was 5 years ago, a lot better than I was 10 years ago. But my son plays volleyball, and the team coach has a rule that if you don't agree with something I did or the way I'm playing you, you can't talk to me for 24 hours after the game. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can approach me and say, "Hey, coach, why'd you have me playing back row when my strength's at the net? Or why am I riding the pines instead of in there? I'm one of your best players." I think we all need a 24-hour rule. If we get an email that we read wrong, or it just comes off like something that we just don't agree with and we have to react right now. Um, if we take 24 hours and come back and read it again in a different mindset, uh, it goes a long way in how the conversation or how the challenge moves forward. So that's one thing that I work on daily. My DNA I struggle with because it's in my blood
So good.
to to try to fix it now and try to react accordingly as quickly as possible. But
Yeah.
24 hours is not a long time. People can wait a day to hear back from you, and it would be a better response if you did that.
Yeah, if I can just tack onto that a little bit, there's that charge that you feel
Yeah.
after the trigger,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Especially when it's something negative. I mean, I would have if I wouldn't have been on an airplane the other day when I got this text message, I probably would have fired. I almost fired him over a text message. I was just like, it was so blatantly bad and like out of place and, and misplaced. And like, I mean, and so, I texted my wife and I was like, you got to help me calm down from this. I'm going to fire this guy. But after what, but you are so right, man. After I sat on it for a day, right, I came back and read it. I was like, okay, it's not as bad as you felt. It's not as bad as you felt. Right, about it. And there's coaching to be done here with this individual for sure. This is
Yep.
not a free pass. This is not like you got triggered for no reason. But thank God for that 24 hours. Thank God I had a 4-hour flight from Salt Lake City to Raleigh, Durham that day because I couldn't do anything, and I needed to calm down from it. So I like
Yeah.
it. 24-hour rule. It's a good one for you guys to implement.
Yeah, definitely recommend it. The vulnerability part,
Yeah.
I was talking about this with our executive vice president the other day about when I felt vulnerable at work. And it was when I was asked to grow. Because when you're asked to take another leadership role or to be on another committee or to do something a little bit higher level than what you're familiar with or used to, you feel uncomfortable and you feel uh, like an imposter. I don't belong in this room with these people. These people are important. Who am I? And that's when I feel most vulnerable. But I think vulnerability is a catalyst for growth. Um, and then you understand as you're in that room and you start to feel like you're in your own skin again, and you have conversations with people that are asking you questions and wanting your input on something pretty dang important, that you understand that you belong there and you can contribute to the conversation. You can also
Yeah.
learn a whole lot from people in a room where you don't belong. If you just sit back and listen and figure out how they're running a meeting or how they're communicating with their peers, take that home, write it down. It's going to come in handy when you are in that role down the road. But I think supporting those people that put themselves out there and pushing people out of their comfort zone and being vulnerable um, helps everybody expand their potential. And I think those tough conversations create an easier work environment down the road.
Good stuff, man. Great interview. Great conversation today, Ty.
Well,
All
Mark, I
good.
really appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate what you're doing in the industry. And it was a pleasure to meet you in person there in Columbus a few weeks back, and really appreciate the invitation to be here with you today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.